Yes, we are. So here we are with the second tape. So, Mother, you were going to tell us some more about before the war and the war years then.
I was 10 when the war started. One thing which sort of sticks in my mind was that my father had gone to work, which was on the 1st of September 39. Mother was listening to the wireless and I was in bed, but with the door open. And I heard my mother say, "Oh no, not again." And then she told me that war with Poland started. Now the Germans were very euphoric over that because it was over so very quickly. And I had just started, I'd changed school, and I had a teacher. And when we returned from the summer holidays, he'd been drafted. So he had a very old teacher who'd been retired, and he was still teaching his old method of you moved places according to what success you had with whatever you were.
Oh, right, so what, clever ones at the front and the...
No, at the back.
Clever ones at the back.
So I moved from third to fourth to second to fourth, sort of every 4 weeks we shifted. I can't remember a lot about what happened afterwards. All I know is that the war was very quickly over as far as Poland was concerned, but of course on the 3rd, I think it was the 3rd of September, Britain and France joined the war. Again, Germany was utterly successful in running over France, finishing that war fairly quickly. As far as they were going, they didn't go to the whole hog. And at that time, which was, that must have been 41 or 40, I'm not sure, I had scarlet fever. And Magdeburg was a garrison town, so there were lots of soldiers coming home with their horses and their tanks and their guns and everything else. And I could look out of the window because they came through our road. The war until 43, as far as the Germans were concerned, was successful. Because, I mean, wherever they went quickly, and then they started the Russian war. And I'm not sure what year it was, but then there was Stalingrad, where the Germans got well and truly beaten.
So were you aware of that at the time?
Oh yes. And then...
what did you see? I mean, were there troops coming back to Magdeburg at the time?
No, what's happening was that they were asking for fur coats and warm blankets and for the soldiers. They were running low. So my mother packed everything she could think of. It was taken away. There was never any concession made that we were losing the war. It was always still, we were successful.
Did you believe that?
I don't know, I was a kid.
Well, do you think your mother and father believed?
My mother and father were extremely careful. They had, by then it was dangerous to talk about various things, and they were very careful to voice an opinion.
Your father was a member of the party, wasn't he? So
yeah, well, he got slung out he got slung out of the party because he couldn't put any. He was so busy that he didn't have any time for them. And I was sent with his party book to give it back. But why or what, it was quiet about that. I wasn't told anything because it was dangerous by then. Incidentally, I don't know whether I've mentioned it before, but my father was a radio ham.
Yes, I know.
And
that,
in
yeah.
1934 or 5, he got put into prison for a few days as a spy. And
No, I didn't know that.
it was during the time there was a golden wedding in Terpst, and Aunt Ria, Lizzie's mother, picked me up to take me to Terpst because I was a flower girl. It was all with church and all sorts of housing cards and everything else. My father was in prison. I didn't know that. I was too young to know what it was all about. But he was allowed to continue afterwards. He had 3 or 4 days. My mother nearly went potty. I'm not sure how, because I was a kid, I never sort of felt deprived, but there were secrets. There were secrets all round.
Did you feel safe?
I didn't feel... Yes, I felt safe, but there were secrets. You didn't talk about it. And then, of course, in 43, 44, the raids, the air raids started. And we lived on the 5th floor. So we had in the cellar, everybody had a cellar where they kept their potatoes and their cabbages and their coal and things like that. That got all sorted out and beds got put in. Well, there were times when we spent days and nights in the cellar. They'd made sure that you could go to all the other houses. They tunnelled through them, so you could go from 3 to 4 to 5 to 6. So
you could move about underground.
So you could escape if necessary. They had heavy steel doors on the outside, and anyway, we sort of always knew. It shifted for a few minutes when the raids would come. The men who were left behind, and there weren't many, had to be out on the roof to pick up all the phosphorus things which were thrown about. We didn't have bombs initially, we had just had something to start fires.
Incendiary bombs.
They weren't bombs, they were little plastic things. And they had a little bit of material in it which would ignite.
Yeah. Set fire.
So, after each alarm, everybody up and watching and looking whether they'd fallen on the roofs or wherever. Everybody had to be responsible, but as I said, there weren't many men left. So the women were doing most of the work as well. My father didn't get drafted until such time as I had scarlet fever. The policeman came, was going to pick him up, and because I stayed at home, they wouldn't have me in the hospital because they were overrun with people. I had a big notice on my door because I had.
You were in quarantine.
So
yeah.
was he, to a degree. He wasn't allowed to. It was the only time when he nearly went to war.
So I imagine because he worked for the Junkers, he was in a reserved occupation.
Yes, very, very much so. Right, now let me think. I can't think
So
of
you
anything.
were You were talking the other day about when you moved to the Harz Mountains.
Yes. Junkers had been flattened by then, and all the personnel moved to the Harz Mountains. Between or around Nordhausen there were underground places which had been dug out by Häftlinge, they call them, people who'd been in
Poles and people
yeah,
from the Baltic
they
states.
dug out and then they went and they produced, by then they produced the jet engine, and the V1 and the V2 were produced there as well. They all came out because it was fair, reasonably deep and reasonably safe. Father went first, and then by then my school was almost flattened as well, because my school was next to the cathedral, and we only got homework and nothing really very much happened. And my mother then had to follow, so I followed it as well. Most children under 14 were evacuated. I was just at the border of it, so I didn't get evacuated, but my cousins, Hannelo and Mika, were evacuated with the school. They went with the school into villages, and my grandparents took the other two hostel, Barbe, and went back to the Harz Mountains as well, to Elba, a place called Elba, where my mother actually was born. Anyway, we followed, and we had the top of a house. Underneath the first floor was a nursery school, which was there during the day, but we weren't there because I had to go to school in a town called Ehrlich every morning, 6 o'clock, with a small train. And arrived there at 6:30, and school didn't start till 8 o'clock, so I wasn't the only one. We all sat around and watched the time. And I couldn't learn anymore. I had a hell of a job for the last 6 months to be able to complete my studies. They all helped though, because they didn't know what it was like to have air raids all the time, and if you didn't have an air raid, then you were still woken up because the aeroplanes came over you.
Mm. So people living in the mountains didn't have a clue what was going on in the cities?
No. But Sorge had its little tragedy as well. I was just looking out of I had a room in the top of the house there, and I was looking towards Sorge, and the aeroplane dropped 3 bombs, just out of the blue. And a few people died, and I watched it. For some reason or other I watched it, because there was sort of like a little building higher up, which I could see, and that got crashed at the same time. So you were never safe.
Mm.
I mean, you never knew what was around the corner or coming from above. The war finished. I talked about that we were occupied before actually the end of the war. And before, people had plenty to eat, and although it was difficult to live, but suddenly there was no food. You were eating grass, literally eating grass at times to keep yourself alive.
You mentioned the other day about a camp.
Yes. I couldn't walk the main road any longer because it was too dangerous and I had to go through the forest and I had to pass the camp there. People escaped from there.
It wasn't a prisoner of war camp.
It wasn't a prisoner of war camp. It was a camp for mainly Poles and political prisoners were held. And two of them escaped and came to our house, and of course we had soldiers in the house, so they didn't last long. They were taken away.
Why did they come to your house?
The last house. They thought they were safe, and in fact they walked into something which guaranteed they weren't going to live long. Because people, soldiers and particularly officers, were still winning the war. You know, and they were escaped prisoners as far as they were concerned, and they didn't give them much chance. We marched them down the road. I could see that one of the soldiers with a gun when he came back on his own, and then we heard afterwards they took ages to die. And eventually the people who were responsible for that were had to go before the law. I don't know what happened.
You mean after the war?
After the war, sort of. They tried to implicate my father because at the time the end of the war was there. He had pneumonia and he was in a terrible state. He could hardly breathe. So they left him alone. But they didn't blame him. But they blamed various other people because the owner of the house was an officer who was in retirement and he was strutting along all the time, and he stopped strutting. But he had nothing to do with it. But you know, by the time they found out what actually happened, that was a very nasty bit of the end of the war. A funny thing happened though. We had some wine and some drinks still in the house, and we were constantly being checked. So every time, first the Americans and then the British came, another bottle went, another bottle went. They left us with none. Another funny thing was my father was a heavy smoker, and not far from where we lived there was a village where they were making chewing tobacco. So everybody went down there and plundered this chewing tobacco. And then they started growing tobacco plants themselves, but the poor things never really got grown up, because they pinched the leaves and cured them and did all sorts of things. When you wanted butter, you didn't have butter, you made semolina and put that onto your bread, which was made with corn flour. And I mean horrible corn flour.
Did you have a garden?
We didn't have a garden. The owner had a garden, and we had a patch. But that's where the tobacco plants were standing.
So instead of growing potatoes, you grew tobacco?
Not only, no, we didn't grow potatoes. We grew a kind of spinach, which grew quickly. What else did we have? Margot, what it was called. It was stony ground and there wasn't much to grow. I'd finished my school education, but then there was no way I could do any more, so we then decided that I would go to college. And the nearest college I could go for what I wanted to do, which was to start to study domestic science, was in Brunswick, Braunschweig. So I applied there. Was too late for that year to go to college, but I had to do a practice year anyway, so I spent a year, 6 months with some people who were having housemaids sort of thing. I had to do the household for 6 months in the next village actually. And then the next 6 months I spent in a children's home in a place in the higher Harz Mountains called Braunlage. By then the Russians had settled themselves and they were already the border. It wasn't totally locked as yet, but it was pretty tight.
Yeah.
Anyway. Then the following year, 2 years I spent in Braunschweig. Completed my course and had to do a year actually doing the job I was trained to do, which was to manage a home of some sort, whether it was elderly or children or whatever. I happened to again go into a children's home. I spent a year in a children's home.
Were these presumably orphans a lot?
No, the first ones weren't. They were the ones who'd been evacuated from Berlin because there was a blockade of Berlin. East was shutting down, so that there was just the French, the British and the American part isolated, totally isolated. So they flew most of the children out and put them in West Germany, which had its tragedies, as you can imagine. They couldn't get home and the parents couldn't see them, and it was very difficult for them. The second time I went to somewhere not far from Braunschweig. There we had children who'd been running away from East Germany. They were picked up at the border by the border guards and then were put into our home.
So these were children who'd left their families in East Germany?
And there were some pretty young ones there as well, but mainly for sort of 12, 13, 14, 15-year-old. And we had lots of problems with them because they'd imagined something different, because you see there was the Golden West was
even at that stage?
Yeah. I'd finished there and I needed to move on, and Father knew of somebody who was actually Ministry of Works, and he said, yeah, I've got some addresses in England. Your daughter interested in it? No, I wasn't. Well, said Father, you learned all that English, you didn't. Has it happened? Oh, I thought so. Might just as well spend a year there. So I went on a year's contract. And where did I go to? Eastman School.
Down the road?
Down the road. Hertford, with the pictures and shopping. There was a Woolworths here. We used to go to Woolworths. There used to be a bus. But Eastman School was in the grounds of Abel Smith's, so there were loads of cows and other animals wandering about, and it was open land. So when we went to the bus, we went out the side gate, but we had to get all through the cows every time, coming back the same. I was responsible for the cooking and feeding of the boys. It was only boys then. and I decided before I go home, I spend a bit of time sightseeing. Now, during the course of all this, I didn't meet. Aunt Lizzie lived with people in the same house who had been a prisoner of war in England, and some English families used to have them for tea on a Sunday afternoon for doing a bit of gardening, and he was one of them who met with a family called O'Shea, typical Irish family. She was huge and he was tiny.
Mm.
And he'd given me the address. He'd sent the address. Lizzie mentioned it, and one way and another, I'm not quite sure how it all started. Anyway, they lived in Barnet. So I went there to introduce myself, and it was just before Christmas. The boys had gone home, so they'd invited me to spend Christmas with them. So I did an Irish first Christmas. And she was a magistrate, and had stories to tell, which was quite interesting. Barnet police station, she was forever there, sorting people out, and and telling stories afterwards, with sort of what kind of misdemeanors were being perpetrated. I finished my year at the East Mount School, and she suggested there was a doctor's family in Barnet. They were looking for somebody to live in with them. So I thought 6 months, do it. Well, I stayed a year. She was German, he was English. They had 2 boys. And they just moved into a new house. Now, in those days, when you build a house here, you had to build it to specifications. You were only allowed so much money.
Yeah.
They had big ideas, and they sort of got stuck every now and again. But anyway, I spent a year there, and then decided to go home. But I got involved with an organisation called International Friendship League, and they had their headquarters in Acton, and they had a guest house. You could stay there. So I decided before I go home, it was just before Christmas, I'll go and spend a few days there and see a bit more of London, because somehow I'd missed out on some of it. When I got there, they said, "You can cook?" Yes. "The cook has left us. Christmas there. Turkey is there. We're going to cook it." So I got stuck. And that's where I met Dad, actually. He used to spend a few days during the week there.
You might stop there just for a minute. Right. So, that's where you met Dad.
Yeah. He had just brought himself into Belmont Press, and he had connections from before the war with trade unions and our customers. He sort of still knew. So he spent the week in London and then went home for the weekend. Well, then he'd separated. He had a room over the factory where all the machinery was.
What, in Northampton?
In Northampton. he'd separated from Grace, and Christine was still at school. She was in a boarding school. He used to go home at weekends. I didn't really take an awful lot of notice of him at the time because we were all sort of one big family. People came and went. Because it was International Friendship League, there were lots of other nationalities turning up. Plenty of Australians and New Zealanders. And
You can't remember the first time you met him or you talked to him?
No.
So it didn't make an instant impact then?
No, because for one thing he was older than the rest of us. You know, we were all in our 20s, early 20s, and he, as far as we were concerned, was a bloke. The others weren't blokes.
So you were all kids really by comparison?
Yeah. But Peacehaven had a dog, Billy. And we couldn't keep Billy in. Billy would wander off, and then every now and again the police station would phone, come and pick him up. He used to ride on the buses, so he didn't just go sort of 100 yards, he went miles, and we had to pick him up. And the warden was Mrs. Heslin. Now Dad had a friendship with Mrs. Heslin. They had something to argue about all the time. So, you know, they were that kind of age group. And she had a dog as well, Laddie. And then he used to pee in the toilet all the time. We had our fights with her about this bloody dog doing his stuff, our stuff, Laddie. Anyway, to avoid Billy from straying during the night and then at 1 o'clock in the morning standing himself in the yard and barking and wanting to be let in, we had a rota of taking the dog for a walk. And that's really how I met Dad. Because, you know, I stood and I said, anybody coming with me to take Billy for a walk? Dad said, okay, I do. And I advised him to get married again after he told me all about his vows and, you know, that his marriage had gone to pot and they'd separated, but they didn't think they were going to be divorced. He was quite clear about it. Anyway, we did come together eventually. He took me to Northampton the first time, and I met his friends there. He had quite good friendships there, because he'd come from, he was farming during the war. Daventry, around Daventry, not Harlingstone, that's where Grace moved to. I have to think about that, what happened there, because they went there because there was family there from Dad's mother.
Well, these early years you were in this country, I mean, we were talking about the early 1950s, and you were a German person straight after the war over here, and you decided to stay, so you can't have been treated too badly by people.
No, the only time I had absolute prejudice was when I came to the post office with a parcel at 5 to 6, and he was finishing at 6 o'clock, and it needed all kinds of declarations and things, and he was fed up with me. He really got mad with me. That was the only time I actually found it very uncomfortable. But otherwise, never.
Weren't you concerned before you came here that you'd find people difficult?
Well, it was 51. The war had been over 5 years. 46, 45 it finished. So, you know, things had calmed down considerably. Mind you, everything was still in disarray. I mean, London was starting to rebuild. We were still having Russian books when I came out. Something we'd long lost in Germany. There wasn't Russian books anymore. Everything was available again. There was a terrific unemployment problem, but everything else was there again. And here, things were still very short because they had to rebuild, and America didn't pay for that. They paid in Germany, but they didn't pay in England. But no, I never encountered blatant anti-German feelings.
Will you stop there for today? Yeah.